What you are about to see is my full-length presentation on the Enneagram that I presented to the Michigan Apologetics Network meeting in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That was in March 2025. Now, I was not originally planning on publishing this video, so there's a section where I walk out a frame and I do a demonstration. So for that part, you can't really tell what's going on, so I'm going to cut the presentation. I'll pop back in and give a little explanation of that part of the talk, and then we'll get back to it. So here I go. I love this quote because the gist of it is you don't know what you don't know, which is something I say all the time. We have to have grace with ourselves, with one another. You don't know what you don't know. I'm going to read it. It makes no difference how smart, highly qualified, or intellectually brilliant you may be. If you know how the deception works, then you cannot be deceived by it. If you do not know, then you can. A rocket scientist can be fooled by a deceiver because she knows about rocket science and not deception. Expertise in one field does not necessarily or not automatically transfer to another. So here's a case that I'm going to try to make today. The Enneagram is a ruse that threatens the foundations of the Christian faith. It first works to make you feel like you better understand humanity. You get it. You understand why people are the way that they are. Then it gives you the answer to why you are that way and why people do the things that they do. But the answers that the Enneagram provides are unfounded, mystical ideas that contradict the gospel. Listen, in this post-truth culture, too many Christians are forming their worldview based on what feels true to them, even if they don't really realize they're doing it. But this leaves believers ripe for being manipulated. The Enneagram is a tool of manipulation. Of course, most people who use it don't realize that because it comes across so innocent. But in reality, it is an occult tool that has been repackaged as a psychological tool, or in some cases as a Christian tool. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about manipulative tactics that are used to make you feel like the Enneagram works and it's so powerful. We'll talk about the origins and the history of the Enneagram and whether that actually matters for how Christians are using it today. And we'll talk about the worldview ideas that the Enneagram promotes. Before we get into it though, hi, I'm Alexa. I'm from Detroit area. Well, we have family over here, so this was fun to come visit family and get to do this for you guys. That's my silly dog. There's my awesome family. I went to Rochester College, and a few years ago I went through a crisis of faith, and the Lord used apologetics to bring me out of that, and I've just been so passionate about apologetics ever since then. I got involved with the Mama Bear Apologetics Ministry, and so I've been writing for their blog and doing some other stuff with them. But a couple years ago I did a series on the Enneagram. That's where I started researching it, and honestly it was like a can of worms. There was more to learn, more to uncover. I had so many questions, and I just kept going down that road. And so that kind of leads to where I am today. So, that being said, what the heck is an Enneagram? Let's look at that. Well, it's essentially a diagram with 9 points, and each point is assigned a number with a list of traits associated with it. Supposedly, everybody has one main number, and that is your number your entire life. It does not change. But here's why the Enneagram is different from other personality tests like Myers-Briggs, the Big Five, the DISC test. It's not really identifying your personality. It actually claims to identify your false self so that you can see your true self, which is who you truly are. Because you see, your true self is this good, pure, innocent essence inside of you. And as you start in early childhood, you start to, experience life, maybe traumas. You're trying to be molded and fit into the society around you. And you start developing patterns of behavior, sometimes sin struggles. And it's like you're building this construct of this identity. But this identity is a false identity. It's not who you really are. You need to become awakened to your true self to see who you really are. But it's a scam. It's a total ruse, and seriously, no shade to anyone who likes the Enneagram or uses it. Remember, it is not about whether you're smart or whether you're gullible. It's about knowing how things like this work to trick the brain. Scientifically, the Enneagram is not an accurate way to type people. Dr. Jay Mendenwalt has a PhD in social and personality psychology, and he says, for those who have studied psychometrics, it is a no-brainer that the Enneagram simply cannot do all its proponents claim that it can. Dr. Mendenwalt has put the Enneagram through the test, literally. He has tested it in the same way that any other personality system would be tested, and it fails every single one of them. The system's not accurate, it doesn't align with reality, it's not reliable, people will get typed differently depending on the test that they're taking or depending on the coach that they're working with. It just shows us it is a totally subjective system. There's nothing objective about it. It's basically been debunked, and there are a few Enneagram organizations that claim that they've had their test scientifically verified, but unfortunately, if you go and analyze their methods for conducting those tests, they're really low quality, and there's problems with it. So if anybody wants resources on this, and actually on anything throughout this, ask me, I can get them to you. I meant to have a list of them on my website that people can go to, or I can put them in the Facebook group, but I'll curate all that for anybody who wants to do some further research into it. But the reason that I'm not going to spend any more time on the scientific aspect of the Enneagram is because a lot of the Enneagram proponents really do not care that it's not scientifically valid. In fact, one of the most popular Christian Enneagram books writes this in their introduction. To borrow a quote from the British mathematician George Box, all models are wrong, but some are useful. That's how I see the Enneagram. It's not infallible or inerrant. It's not the be-all and end-all of Christian spirituality. At best, it is an imprecise model of personality, but it's very useful. It's just a tool. Don't make such a big thing about it. It's not even correct, but it will change your life. So, all right, let's just say that by the end of this, I'm able to persuade you all that the Enneagram is a manipulative occult tool. Just give me that for a second. Is that really even something to be concerned about, or is this totally a fringe thing? Well, there have been many books by now that have been published by Christian publishers on the Enneagram. There are Bible devotionals you can get that are reading the Bible, like curated to your particular Enneagram type. There are several Christian Enneagram organizations. They will come and train your staff at your church. And there are entire 9-week-long sermons you can find on YouTube based on the Enneagram. Church sermons based on personality system. Not only that, but there are some pretty well-known Christians that either promote the Enneagram or they've kind of given their stamp of approval. Beth Moore and Russell Moore have both tweeted about their Enneagram numbers. Andy Steeling has been on an Enneagram podcast. Also, John Mark Comer and Max Lucado have been on this Enneagram podcast. And speaking of this podcast, it's a really, really popular podcast. They have like millions and millions of downloads. This is called Typology, and the host is Ian Cron, who is co-author of this book here, The Road Back to You, which has sold over 1 million copies. It's incredibly influential in the Christian Enneagram world. So, it's not a fringe thing, what I'm trying to say. And it's funny, because some circles I feel like of Christians have never heard of it, and then other circles, though, it's like everyone they know uses the Enneagram. But let's be real. The Enneagram is just the current vehicle to sow anti-gospel ideas into the church. Today it's the Enneagram, tomorrow it's something else new and exciting. Whatever the vehicle is, it's a Trojan horse. And it's sneaking ideas into the church that undermine what has been historically understood as the Christian faith. And it's our responsibility to recognize when a Trojan horse is in the church. The enemy is wreaking havoc in the most subtle and sinister ways. And he's doing it within our walls and with our approval.
On that note, who wants to see a card trick? So there's this concept called outs, and it's used by like magicians and mentalists, even psychics, really anybody that's doing any kind of psychological trickery. And this is where they set up the scenario so that it's like a win-win situation. They always have an escape route no matter what happens. It's going to look intentional. So I came across this clip that is a great example of how a magician might use an out. And I'm going to show it to you right now. Check it out.
Name a card, Pen. Anyone.
4 of hearts.
It would have fooled you, but I'll move on as planned.
So since the correct card wasn't guessed, he can just make everybody laugh and turn it into a joke. That's an out. So now that you've seen an example of what an out can be for a magic trick, let's talk about how outs work in the Enneagram. Back to it.
So the Enneagram is full of outs. See all the arrows? They're basically all out. So once you get the Enneagram, or once you get your number, the Enneagram becomes like a map. And here's what you have to understand. This chart is not a chart of different types of people all connected. It is, this whole thing is you. This is your ego, yourself, which has been fractured. So everyone supposedly has one type, dominant type within them, but, everybody supposedly has every type in them, but one type is dominant. So then the connecting lines, they represent how energy flows from their type to the next, where you take on traits from other numbers depending on if you are in integration or disintegration. Some of the Enneagram teachers will say you're on either a healthy path or an unhealthy path. Integration is when you're balancing all the different types of energies. That would be your true self. If you were able to perfectly balance or take energies from every number, you would be perfectly balanced. That would be your true self. Disintegration is when the different parts of you are fractured and you're retreating back into your false self, which is like a mask that you wear. So let's just take an example. All right, pretend you are a type 1, you're the perfectionist, you find yourself on the Enneagram, and now the Enneagram is your map. So when you are in health or in growth, you're gonna actually look like a healthy 7. But when you are in stress or disintegration, you're gonna look like an unhealthy 4. So a 1 can actually look like a 1, a 7, or a 4. But wait, there's more. You also have wing numbers, which are the numbers on either side of your main number. So a 1, and you can take the traits of those numbers as well. So wait, a 1 can actually look like a 1, a 7, a 4, a 9, or a 2. Oh, your number, you can look like more than half the numbers on the chart. It's almost like a deck of cards with 51 outs. Once you buy into the system, you will always find yourself somewhere on it. So, it is true. We all have different personalities, and our personalities are fluid. We're not static. So we change depending on our mood, depending on the season of life. You know, before I had kids, I was super extroverted, and then I had kids, and now my time, when it's my alone time, is very precious to me, and that's what recharges me. So it is true that we do change in different seasons of life. But the Enneagram, it takes these kind of obvious concepts and then puts them into a system with plenty of outs so that it can never be wrong. And since you don't know what you don't know, if you don't know about outs, it's actually really easy to get taken in by something like this. It's a ruse. And speaking of ruses, has anyone ever heard of what's called the rainbow ruse? This was new to me when I was doing my research. This is kind of cool though. It's a technique, but it's used by fortune tellers and mentalists and mediums and that kind of thing. And it's basically a statement where they'll attribute 2 opposite traits. Oh man, I gotta fix that. They'll attribute 2 opposite traits to you in a statement that basically covers all possibilities. So here's an example of a rainbow ruse statement. You can be a very, and think about this. Think if you could relate to this. You can be a very considerate person, quick to help someone out. But if you're honest with yourself, you've got a bit of a selfish streak in you as well. So basically called you considerate and selfish, but no matter how considerate you are or how selfish you are, anybody would be able to relate to that statement. So here's how the rainbow ruse can be applied, or is applied, all over the Enneagram. And we're going to take the type 1 that we were just looking at before. And I rearranged the traits so you could see. A type 1 can go all the way from self-accepting all the way to self-pity. From empathetic all the way to detached. I have some more examples. I'm going to play a little video. These are from YouTube influencers who teach the Enneagram. So I just put a little compilation together so you can see. So think about the rainbow ruse when you hear this.
So which one are they, fearful or courageous? They're both. Trusting and wanting people to trust, and at the same time, distrusting. Believers and doubters, cooperative and obstructionist, generous and at the same time petty. A bundle of opposites.
They are tough. Sometimes they can come off as intimidating, but underneath is a very tender heart as well.
Now, when they're not healthy, they actually want to cut off their emotions or ignore their emotions. But here at their best, they actually take time to understand their emotions and to really go there and be authentic.
See what I mean? The Enneagram covers all possibilities from one extreme to the other. These statements can come across as really insightful, but they're not actually telling you anything meaningful because it's your own brain that's filling in all the meaning. But the effect is that you end up believing whatever the source of these statements is, that it's valid and trustworthy. This is a similar effect to what are known as Barnum statements. Now, the statements that you got at the end of your pirate ninja quiz were all Barnum statements. So this is, of course, P.T. Barnum. Does anybody else just love this movie? This is one of my favorites. It's the best movie. So Barnum was a showman, and he would wow the crowd and give them a sense of wonder using sleight of hand. And Barnum statements, they're named after him for the wow, because they can really wow you, but it's just a psychological effect. Barnum statements are crafted statements. They feel that they're personally describing you and your unique self, but in reality, they're just vague, general statements that can be applied to large numbers of people. So I'm going to read to you some statements. The road back to you has a list of statements that you can read for every single type, and that's kind of what helps you determine what your type is. But they are all Barnum statements. So I'll give you some examples. I don't like to find myself in unpredictable situations. I find it hard to stop thinking about things I'm worried about. Is that anybody? Is anybody not? I'm generally not comfortable with extremes. I don't trust people who give me too many compliments. It helps me to have things in some kind of order. That's the most generic statement of all. Like, that could be interpreted in so many different ways. And then there's like the type 3, there was one that says, I'm competitive to a fault. Well, I wouldn't call myself competitive, but it's still a Barnum statement because even though it kind of leans toward a specific stereotype, it still will apply to a lot of people. So if you think about how this works, each type, all they have to do is pick Barnum statements that kind of lean towards, an overachiever or a perfectionist, string them together, and it's like you got this nice little ruse going on. All right, so I have another quote that I'm going to read from this book here. It's called The Full Facts Book of Cold Reading. Cold reading is like psychics, mentalists, fortune teller, they're giving you a reading. So this quote is in the context of a psychic reading, how a psychic is manipulating their client. But that should say something about how well it relates to what's going on with the Enneagram. I'm just saying. All right, let me mention another aspect of cold reading psychology. In the course of a successful reading, the psychic might provide most of the words, but it is the client that provides most of the meaning and all of the significance. Clients tend to graft their own specific experiences onto the more generalized words and themes provided by the psychic. This phenomenon is all over the teachings and the coachings of the Enneagram. And once you back up and start to read and listen to the Enneagram content from that perspective, looking for how generic the phrasing always is and the explanations of why somebody acts the way they do in a certain way, you start to see that they're using a lot of words, but they're really not saying much. Actually, when I started doing research and listening to the Enneagram content, it became so boring because I'm listening to it from a generic perspective. I'm not trying to fill in my own experiences. And it's like, oh my gosh, it becomes pretty boring, actually. All right, and so, like we said before, since people are not exactly the same, you can do this with stereotypes. You string a bunch of these statements together. You can lean towards into, once you kind of get to know who this person is, you lean into a stereotype, and then, bam, they're like, you know me, you get me. All right, so we've talked about outs. We've talked about the rainbow ruse. We've talked about Barnum statements. I'm going to talk about one more manipulative technique that is done on purpose to deceive people. Claims of ancient origins. tarot cards, and they'll rough them up real good, make them look old, so they can claim that they're ancient. Because it is known that for whatever reason, people will buy whatever's being told to them if they think that they're tapping into some kind of ancient wisdom. Has anybody ever heard the claim that the Enneagram is ancient? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, guess what? It's not. Not only is that made up, one of the creators, developers of the Enneagram admits that he made this up so that people would trust it more. And that's on video, on YouTube. He has no shame. He didn't think that was a problem at all. So, what's the real story? Well, meet George Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff was a Russian mystic, and he came up with this super duper mystical diagram in the early 1900s, and he believed that it held all the knowledge of the universe and all the laws of the universe. See the triangle there? He came up with that using the law of three, which represents three forces of reality: active, passing, and reconciling. And then the other shape that connects the rest of the numbers, he used the law of seven. It connects 6 numbers, but the reason it's the law of 7 is because you take 1 divided by 7, obviously, and you get 0.14285 This is just how they're all connected by the arrows, and that repeats. And so that kind of represents the cyclical nature of all things and how energy goes from one point to the next point, and he believed energy moved in patterns of 7. And Gurdjieff used the Enneagram to come up with mathematical equations and dances, and if this is sounding a little wacky to you, it's probably because you all forgot to take your magic mushrooms this morning. Come on! You gotta open up those consciousnesses. All right, back to reality. Gurdjieff was a con man, a cult leader, and a master manipulator. Unfortunately, his teachings are still being spread today, and they influenced the New Age movement. So, unless you're under Gurdjieff's spell, the origin story for the Enneagram is not looking so good. Next, we have Oscar Ichazo. Fast forward into the 1960s, he was a philosopher who taught secret esoteric ways to reach enlightenment. He regularly consulted with spirit guides, creepy. He founded the Eureka School in Eureka, Chile, which is a school for spiritual seekers. There's a story from one of his students that said that they were like in a session, and Ichazo would have all the students sit in a circle, and one would sit in the middle and meditate, and the rest of the students would hurl insults at the one meditating, and his goal was to remain in a meditative state and try to separate himself from his ego, or his sense of self, basically. So that's the kind of thing that was going on there. So Ichazo used the Enneagram to diagnose his students, to tell them what their main problem is that blocks them from their true self and their true potential. And he called these ego fixations. So these ego fixations, they actually form the foundation of the Enneagram system as it's used today. So here you can see Ichazo took the 7 deadly sins, but he needed 2 more. So he added cowardice and vanity. Sometimes they're called fear and deceit. Still, there were no personality types. That development came from Ichazo's student, Claudio Naranjo, who was a psychiatrist who liked to experiment with psychedelic drugs, He was really interested in accessing the spiritual realm, and he's known for blending psychotherapy with spirituality. I need to make a side note here that Naranjo called Ichazo, Naranjo was a student of Oscar Ichazo, he called him a liar and a manipulator, but he still wanted to study under him because he was so amazed at his knowledge of the Enneagram. Crazy. So, Claudio Naranjo took what he learned from Ichazo, he took all that he learned from his medical background, in medicine, and his years of research and peer-reviewed studies, and he added the Enneagram types. He put that through scientific testing, and I'm kidding, he didn't do it. That is not what he did. Claudio Naranjo received the types through automatic writing, which is spirit contact, where you go into a trance and the spirit writes for you. There's a video on YouTube you can watch where he makes that claim. That video started making the rounds in the Christian world, and understandably, people were very upset by it. But then you had the Christian Enneagram proponents come out, and they all said, you guys are just so scared of everything. He's not talking about spirit contact. That's not what he meant by automatic writing. He just meant that he was doing like stream of consciousness writing, where you just let all your knowledge and years of research flow out onto the paper. That's all he was talking about. Well, I found another video, and most people have not seen this video yet. It only has like 400, 500 views, I think. And in this video, Claudio Naranjo describes his automatic writing experience. So I'll let you be the judge of whether he's talking about something spiritual and occultic or not.
After this retreat I had in the desert in the north of Chile, I felt like my hand wanted to do something. And I put it on a piece of paper, and then I wrote something, and no, it was not that. And I had to just not do anything, and then it started moving on its own. And I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I cannot say I wrote. And much that what I have later talked about in the Enneagram came to me through this process of what sometimes is called automatic writing. And when I saw Oscar Ichazo about a year later, I said, does this come from you or from those behind you? And he said, very naturally, both.
I love that Oscar Ichazo took credit for that. I think that's funny. Those edits, just a quick side note, I just was editing out that she was translating for him, so it was going to take a lot longer if I didn't edit that out. So I'm pretty sure we can rule out the idea that Naranjo was not talking about the occultic practice of automatic writing, right? He definitely believed he was getting this information from the spiritual realm. The big question now is, so what? What does that have to do with the Enneagram now? Are we supposed to avoid every tool that was created by a non-Christian? Can we only learn from other Christians? Let me be clear, just because a non-Christian makes a claim, that does not make the claim false. That's not an argument that I'm making, okay? But when a person claims to see hidden mystical meaning in a shape, consult with spirit guides, and be able to guide you to a higher consciousness, and then actually channel information from a spirit, Christians have good reason to be skeptical. And I go as far as to say, we have good reason to just outright reject the claim. The origins of something doesn't always matter. But in this case, it does, because the origins actually invalidate the system. There's absolutely no reason to trust the Enneagram. And further, from a biblical worldview, the origins show that this tool, the so-called tool, is spiritually dangerous because it's steeped in the occult. Okay, well, we throw this word occult around a lot, so let's actually define it because it can be pretty vague. Now, I'm getting this definition from this book, Spellbound. I have it over there if you want to look at it later, by Marcia Montenegro. And I'm still going through this book, but it's really good. It's helpful for clarifying what's going on in the occult from a Christian perspective. So she defines occult as this, not a belief system, but rather an umbrella term for a set of practices that arise from assorted belief systems involving a blend of secret teachings, hidden meanings, and supernatural or paranormal activities. Now, the word occult is not found in the Bible, as far as I know, but occult practices are forbidden by God. So we're going to look at this passage in Deuteronomy. Now, this was not written to us. It was written as instruction to the nation of Israel for entering the Promised Land. But this definitely shows us how God feels about occult practices. And remember, God's character does not change. So if he feels about it like this back then, he still feels that way about them. Okay? So let's read. When you enter the land the Lord your God has given you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination. Pause. What is divination? Divination is the practice of obtaining information using a means beyond the natural, or by reading hidden meaning into ordinary patterns or objects. Okay, let's go back. Interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium, a spiritist, or who consults the dead. Pause again. A medium, a spiritist, or who consults the dead. Basically, anyone who is doing anything to try and contact with spirit and spirit realm. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God. The nations you will dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery or divination. But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. It's not that bad, though. All right, so far we have talked about manipulative tactics that are used to make the Enneagram feel like it's so powerful and like it works. We've talked about the occult origins. But how does this affect people's use of it today? Some Christians claim that they can use the Enneagram as long as they do it through a gospel-centered lens or from a biblical worldview. What they're saying is that, well, there's truth to it, and we can take what's true about it and just reject any unbiblical beliefs, any New Age beliefs added to it. Well, if that were possible, I wouldn't be here doing this presentation today. By using the Enneagram, you are accepting and promoting some assumptions that actually work against our Christian beliefs. These assumptions are: the Enneagram symbol has meaning, everyone has a type, and everyone has a true or a false self. You cannot use the Enneagram without affirming these assumptions. Denying any of these renders the system meaningless, so in order for Christians to use the Enneagram, they are necessarily accepting these ideas as true. A Christian who says that who uses the Enneagram but says they don't necessarily believe anything like that, it's like someone who says, I do not believe airplanes can fly. And they say this while they're in the air on an airplane. You know what I mean? You're denying it with words, but you're trusting it with your actions. So, what's wrong with these assumptions? Let's go one by one. This assumption that the Enneagram symbol has meaning. Well, remember that divination, which includes reading hidden meaning into ordinary patterns, is forbidden by God. Finding hidden meaning in this symbol is divination. The Enneagram system is founded on this hidden meaning. And look again what these symbols represent. The circle around the Enneagram represents oneness, and the oneness of all reality. So divine energy is flowing through all things. These are esoteric. Did I talk about and then we talked about the triangle, the law of 3, the law of 7, how energy is flowing through all things in certain patterns. All of these are occult beliefs, but they are used to explain the 9 types. So you don't have the 9 types without this. But this contradicts Christianity. The Bible teaches that God created us separate from himself. There's a reason why we're forbidden from worshiping created things. The divine is not flowing through all created things. Also, we're told in the Bible that sin has separated humanity from God. This is why Jesus died, to bring us reconciliation to him. But the Enneagram is founded on the belief that nothing is ever truly separated from anything. All is one. So if you buy into this idea of the oneness of all things, you lose the gospel. All right, assumption that everyone has a type. Well, what are we really saying when we say everyone has a type? You're saying that everyone has a core sin that each person has to battle with their whole life, because each number is founded. Remember how Oscar Ichazo was the ego fixations, which are the sins of the Enneagram. That's what characterizes every single type. It's this core sin. It's your problem. It's the thing that's keeping you from your true self. So if we're telling people that everybody has a core sin that they have to battle with their entire life, you can't get away from it, you can't really they'll say that the Enneagram brings freedom, but at the same time they're saying you can't get free of your number, which means you can't get free of your sin. But then we're saying that Christ saves us from our sin, frees us from sin. So how can we go around telling people that there's a particular sin that you will always have to deal with, no matter what? Think about it this way. Who from a biblical worldview is the one who accuses you, who tries to torment you with your sin, who tries to bind you to sin? I'll give you a hint. It's not Jesus. It's not Jesus. The Enneagram attempts to bind you to a specific sin, and that is not Christ. It's literally the opposite of the gospel. And then the assumption that everyone has a true and a false self. Well, even Christians who teach the Enneagram will teach you that everything you do, even your sin, comes from a good intention, because your true self is good. So when you sin, you're just taking an unhealthy path to accomplish something good. Well, that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says that sin is lawlessness, that it's rebellion against a holy God. Our problem doesn't lie with a false identity. It lies with hardened hearts. That's at the root of our sin. We sin out of our own will. We don't have a false self. Our sin is very true. Also, if everyone has a false and a true self, and all we really need to do is to come into awareness of our essence, then there's no need for salvation. Everyone just has to realize that you're good to go. You're already saved. Again, no need for the gospel. All right. Again, there is no such thing as using the Enneagram without accepting, at least in some way, these anti-gospel ideas. And these ideas are actually very, truly dark. The idea that all is one, which is the idea that undergirds the Enneagram philosophy, can sound nice and positive, but it is a trap because it bids you to come and die. And not in the same way that Christ calls us to die to ourselves. I'm going to show you this video, Claudio Naranjo. He's the one that added the types to the system. And he tells a story where he felt invited to become nobody. And just for some context, I cut this part out, but he was experimenting with ibogaine, which is a psychedelic drug. So he's telling about this trip he went on, but it was very influential in his life. All right, here we go.
At some point I felt like lying down, and after lying down I felt as if the whole world was turning around me. And it was like a cosmic dance, regularity, the orbits of all the celestial bodies. Of course I was eyes closed. But the sense was that there is a universal harmony, and I am at the center of everything, and not part of that dance. I'm holding on to myself, I'm holding on to something. And I have a sort of miserable life by not joining to this universal life. And part of me wants to be part of it, and part of me is afraid that if I turn the switch, so to say, if I say, let me be, let me let go and be part of everything in its wonderful intrinsic harmony. What if God wants me to be dust? What if I choose by that, through that, to be nobody? I was not ready to be nobody. I was too self-important. And it happened as if there was a timing to the process of decision, as if I had my fingers for too long on the switch. And it was not granted that I had this opportunity. It was too much of a delayed yes. And from then on, and this was very illustrative for me, from then on it was Mickey Mouse. It was cartoons. Trivial cartoons, boring cartoons. It's a world of entertainment. So there was no way to come back. It was like as if I had lost my chance. We were not ready.
Can you see this sadness in his face? But such a strange thing. This ideology is a call to death of self, and not to die to yourself in the Christian sense, where Christ then gives you life. So let me ask you, which worldview has more value for humanity? One that says that your experience of the self is just an illusion? Or one where God intentionally created each individual and intends each human to exist forever and to experience a self? Right? This universal harmony that Naranjo was talking about, that's the true self that the Enneagram is supposed to awaken you to. It's pretty dark. I'm going to show you one more example of the dark side of this philosophy. Anybody have kids? Ever seen the movie Frozen 2? Alright, well in Frozen 2, Elsa, she is hearing this call to her. It's like this little musical tone, and it's calling her throughout the movie, and she's wondering, who is this? Who's calling me? And who am I? And she's all confused about her identity, and she goes on this journey to find who this voice is. In her mind, it's her mother, who had died when she was little. So she desperately wanted to see her mom. Well, what she discovers is that it was not her mother, it was the memory of her mother calling to her. But it was a call to come into her true self. And this is supposed to be a really emotional scene. It's meant to be really beautiful and empowering, and I find it utterly hopeless and depressing. I literally, if I watch this movie with my kids, I will be sobbing during this song, and every time I have a discussion with the kids, I'm like, I describe what I'm about to describe to you now, because it's not a happy ending. Look at the lyrics. Elsa, she's desperate. She's saying, "You are the answer I've waited for all of my life. Show yourself. Let me see who you are." And then the song sings back, the voice sings back to her, "Step into your power. Grow yourself into something new. You are the one you've been waiting for all of your life." And I'm like, okay, her mom died when she was little. She's desperate for this outside love for her mom. And she finds out, no, there's no one there. There's no one but you. It's all you. Step into your own power. No one there to love you. No one there to help you. And it's like, if I think about it from the perspective of someone who's already rejected that a good God is outside of you and loves you and cares for you, then I guess the next best thing is to at least believe that you're powerful, that you have some power within you that you can access. But it's like a counterfeit good news, because it's not really good at all. It's pretty dark. So, how in the world did Christians look at the Enneagram with all its dark ideology and think, yeah, that I can incorporate that into my Christian walk. That's compatible. What if they didn't? What if there was a middleman? What if there was someone who actually really sympathized with these ideas over here? Thought that they were really beautiful.
I know who it is.
Yeah, I bet you do. But also enjoyed the tradition and the language and the history of this over here. And what if this person just covered the Enneagram in Christian language and then just, redefine terms like sin, love, God, Christ, etc., and then presented the Enneagram as a Christian tool to unsuspecting Christians? All right, Dr. Grotes, who is it?
Richard Rohr.
Oh, right.
Rohrster.
That's right. So Richard Rohr is a Roman Catholic priest, a Franciscan friar, and he holds several just outright heretical beliefs. He is a panentheist, so he believes it's kind of like pantheism, where God is in all things, but panentheism is where God is in all things and transcends creation. He's a universalist, so he believes there's no need for salvation, everybody is already saved. He's a perennialist, he believes that all religions lead to the same God. He believes that Jesus is a separate thing from the Christ, and he sees the Christ in his God. Enough said. So Richard Rohr is really at the root of how the Enneagram became Christianized. If you look at the influences of all the Christian Enneagram teachers out there, at least as far as I've been able to look into it, pretty much all roads lead back to the Rohrster. The authors of The Road Back to You, which, like I said, is probably the most popular Enneagram book in the Christian world, were both personally mentored by Richard Rohr. So he has a huge influence. All right. So let's look at how the Rohrster made the Enneagram look kind of Christian. So we've got the Enneagram worldview, that God is in all, the biblical worldview, that God is creator. Richard Rohr says, God is creator and is in all. The Enneagram talks about your ego fixations. The Bible talks about how humans have sinned against God. Richard Rohr says, well, humans have sinned against themselves. The Enneagram says you have a true and a false self. The Bible says if you are a believer, you have a new and an old self. That's a totally different thing, because if you have a new self, that means that you have been saved by Christ, you've received the Holy Spirit, you have a new identity, you You have a new lifestyle. You're rejecting your old lifestyle. That's what the new and old self is. It's totally different concept than the true and the false self. Where Richard Rohr says, the true and the false self is the same thing as the new and the old self. The Enneagram says, basically, you save yourself by becoming enlightened. A biblical worldview says Christ saves you, and he invites you into the kingdom. The Rohrster says the Christ in yourself saves you, and you just need to become enlightened that you're already in the kingdom. What I'm trying to show you is that the meaning of Christian words, like Christ, sin, and the entire message of the gospel gets redefined into a counterfeit Christianity. And people don't realize that the same words are being used, but with totally different meanings. Biblical words are being redefined. Now, when people become straight up disciples of Richard Rohr, it's often pretty clear that their theology is taking a turn. But the influence of Rohr's wacky theology can really go under the radar when it comes to a lot of the Enneagram teachers, because they're using what sounds like Orthodox Christian language. You really have to pay close attention to how these terms are being used. So, for example, when these teachers start talking about the new self in the Christ, but then equate that to the true self of the Enneagram, which they do all the time, they're making a huge theological error. Like I said, the true self and the false self, and the new self and the old self, totally different concepts. But this, Richard Rohr's theology, it's literally an anti-gospel, anti-Christ theology. So can anyone start to see the danger here? I am concerned for the church. This counterfeit theology, it's being spread through conferences, through books, through podcasts, online content. It's not just the Enneagram that's the problem. It's that once they start following Enneagram teachers, they can be introduced to some really bad teaching. I watched several of the sessions from this summit this past February, and just to give you an example, one of the pieces of advice they gave to a type 1, which is a perfectionist, for spiritual discipline is to not make your bed. That's just like a reframing of what spiritual discipline even means. It's like this shift in your mindset in what even the faith is all about. It sounds silly, but it's like when you can laugh at it, right? I laughed when I heard it. I'm like, no way! And then I'm like, wait a minute though. It's like if you hear this over and over and over again, and all these kinds of teachings, they're shifting. What does it mean to have faith? And then it makes it all about you. And then this other thing that I heard in this conference that was really disturbing to me is they gave advice that if you have experienced church hurt, it might be safest for you to walk away from God for a little while. And the host of this session was like nodding along, like approving of this. And I could not believe my ears. I had to go back and re-listen to it. And I'm like, okay, do we not realize, that's satanic. That's literally satanic, telling you to walk away from God. But they, of course, feel very like it's compassionate. I could say some other things that they talked about, but I'd be opening a whole other can of worms. So the point is, we in the church, we need to have our eyes open. God has provided us with protection against deception, but we have to put it on. We are not automatically protected by the Holy Spirit. God intends for us to mature in Him, so we do play a role. And I'm not making that up. It's in the Bible. Let's read. We will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body who is the head, that is Christ. My theory is that if the devil can't take the souls of people that already belong to Christ, the next best thing for him to do is to keep God's people immature, because they'll be less effective at growing the kingdom. And he'll do anything he can to keep us from putting on the armor God has given us. If we don't make the choice to put on the armor of God, we are vulnerable to the devil's schemes. Let's read. Finally, be strong in the Lord and His mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. Take note that if you want to be able to stand, you have to put on the armor. And after you've done everything to stand, stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist. The belt of truth is foundational for the rest of the armor. You have to start with truth. With the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Also take note that the sword of the Spirit is our only offensive weapon. Everything else is defensive. In order to wield the sword of the Spirit, you actually have to know it. You have to know your Bible. So that's something we need to take more seriously in the church. The Enneagram is a scheme of the enemy, one of many. Now I'll end with this. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ.
Amen.